Welcome to Moms Don't Have Time to Read Books, hosted by me, Zibby Owens. It's an award-winning podcast with over 1,900 episodes, all featuring authors of books you love and those you have yet to discover. Listen daily 5 times a week. Then go to zibbymedia.com and learn more about what the LA Times called the Zibbyverse. Zibby Media includes Zibby's Bookshop, an independent bookstore in Santa Monica, Zibby Books Publishing, Zibby Retreats, Zibby's Book Club, and more. Go check it out at zibbymedia.com and follow me on Instagram at Zibby Owens. It'll take you where you need to go. Thanks for listening. Sarah Sawyer is the author of The Undercurrent. This is the Zibby Books title for October, and we are so excited for it. Gillian Flynn, who wrote Gone Girl, is one of the people who blurbed it, including Chris Whitaker and others. People are going crazy for this book, so you have to check it out. Sarah Sawyer is an English teacher who lives and works at a boarding school in Western Massachusetts, where she finds endless humor and inspiration in her colleagues and students. She is a graduate of Amherst College and the Breadloaf School of English. The Undercurrent is her first novel. Welcome, Sarah. Congratulations on The Undercurrent. So excited to talk to you today about this fabulous debut novel of yours. Congrats.
Thank you for having me.
Okay, tell everybody, what is The Undercurrent about? The big question.
About a lot of things, I think.
It is about a lot of things.
Well, it is the story of a new mom named Bee, who becomes fixated with the story of a girl who went missing in her neighborhood when she was a kid. And because she is struggling with her new motherhood, she gets the idea in her head that she's going to go back to her hometown and unravel this mystery. And she ends up uncovering some family secrets that have been beneath the surface of her life all along. That's the story.
Amazing. So you are an English teacher. This is your first book ever.
Yes.
Why this topic? Why these characters? Like, how did this whole thing happen? Why now? Like, maybe back up and just give us some background on how we even got here and how this is the book that you ended up writing.
Well, there are a lot of ways to tell that story, I think. But the sort of immediate thing that made me sit down and write was that my daughter, when she was going into 10th grade, ended up having a thyroid disorder that made her lose 40 pounds. And her resting heart rate was like 158. And just in the span of just months, this happened, right? And nobody could figure it out. And it was a whole thing. And then when they solved the thyroid problem, she gained 40 pounds again. And for a sophomore girl, this was like a little rough, I think. And it got me thinking about just the girl bond, and how it transforms so spectacularly. Even if you don't have a wacky thyroid, like over the course of your life, you have to live in all these different bodies. So that was the first thing I was thinking of. I loved being a little girl. I felt so strong. I won all the presidential fitness. It was amazing, and then all of a sudden it's like, at least that's what it felt like to me. So I was thinking about that. And I think that at that same time, I started to say I was reading Madame Bovary, and I started to think about her as a character and wondered what would happen if a woman had written that book, wondered if she was just bored, wondered if she was a creative person who was sort of stuck. So those things kind of came together and really made me sit down and start writing. Other than that, I can't truly tell you where it all came from. I don't know.
And had you always wanted to write a novel? Was that a goal?
Yeah. I have tried a few times. I wrote many years ago when I turned 40. I have a family scrapbook that's super intriguing. And I wrote a very bad novel about the woman that the scrapbook is about and tried to tell it in that way. So I think I'm always interested in just sort of the experience of women in the world and in the ways that like mothers and daughters interact. I think that's really fascinating. Yeah.
And you said a minute ago, but it got cut off a little bit.
Oh, no.
How you felt, this was before, but how you felt as your own body was changing and fitness and all that. Could you just tell that piece again?
Oh, sure. So actually, the opening scene of the novel is sort of inspired by something that I remember very vividly as a child because I don't know if I got cut off, but I was talking about the presidential fitness tests and how I loved them because I won them all the time and I loved them. And
This is
when
like push-ups and sit-ups and all that?
yeah, like
Okay,
you
yeah.
run the mile
Yeah,
and you
yeah,
do the arm hang and
yeah.
all that. And in the Texas public schools, these were a very big deal. So when I was little, I loved them. And when I think when between third and fourth grade, things started shifting and moving, and all of a sudden I didn't win anymore, and I had like all kinds of things happening. And I just didn't have that like strong little girl body anymore. And I can remember standing in a field next to my house and being like, what has happened? And like trying to run really fast and trying to figure out if I could still run really fast. So for me, that was like a sad experience. It didn't feel magical and wonderful because I watched all my friends who were boys get bigger and stronger. And I was like, wait a minute, what's happening? And then, over the course of my life, obviously, you have babies, all kinds of things happen to your body. And meanwhile, I feel like I watch my husband. I'm like, what? You just get to just be? Just nothing happens to you? You don't grow milk ducts? Like that's how nice for you? So it just felt not magical, but maybe like a little bit of a betrayal of the body. And I'm very grateful, obviously, for what I have and my good health. But I also think there is that selfishness in me that I wanted to write about.
Interesting. So one of the perspectives is as a new mother from B and her life today, and then you go back in time. And by the way, the craft involved in the multiple perspectives and timelines, how did you do that? And like, how did you decide that that was the way to tell the story, and how did you execute it?
Well, there is a line in the novel that is really just me talking about what it felt like to tell the story. And I'm going to get it wrong and it's my own novel, but it's something like the story is rotating slowly in a liquid darkness. And that's kind of what stories feel like to me. They have all these different parts to them. And I think probably because I'm a teacher and I'm just very aware of trying to make the experience in the room as common as it can be, but also being aware that there are just if you have 15 kids in the room, they're having 15 different days and experiencing the room in 15 different ways. So I'm very aware of that in just my lived experience. And I think to tell the story, I really felt like, the problem with the women in the novel is that they think they understand the story, as we all like to think we understand the story, but that it needed all these different perspectives in order for that point to become clear that we don't know everybody's story, and that we have to listen and we have to be open, right, to what other people are living. Craft wise, it was hard. I wanted B to be in the present time, but then there was a desire to have her speak in the past, which would have been a mess. It was just it just took a lot of discipline and sort of clarity of purpose, I think, to make it. And I hope it was successful, but I can thank Bridie, my editor, for that as well. But, you have to really keep your eye on what it is that you mean to do if you're going to mess around with multiple perspectives, that's for sure.
Well, it was, from an execution standpoint, it was so well done. You are such a great writer. I mean, I remember reading even the first draft, and oh my gosh, you're just so talented. So it's amazing. I'm not surprised that it's gotten so much praise and all the rest. Aww. Can we go back for a second to the experience of what happened to your daughter? And I'm so sorry that happened, but you were like, nobody knows happening and blah, blah, blah. But I feel like that would derail my life in such a big way to have that panic. And anytime anything happens to a kid, especially something you can't figure out, everything, you feel it in your own body so much. Tell me what that whole experience was like, and how can you talk about that anymore?
Sure. Yeah. Well, you're only as happy as your unhappiest child, right? Mm-hmm. It was hard because it was right after COVID. So we had that, our school was open during COVID. So my daughter was in ninth grade, going to school, wearing a mask, trying to, be a ninth grader. And then this happened, and it was hard because her pediatrician sort of said, well, it's anxiety or she's anorexic. And I was like, no, girl loves to eat. And not to offend your professionalism, but I work with lots of teenagers and I know why you're saying that, but that's not what this is. So it just took maybe longer than it should have to sort of solve. And once it was solved, it was quickly solved, right? And it's sort of an easy fix minus 7 million times going to the doctor. So it ended up being fine. And she's a pretty determined person. She had a hip surgery last year. She's had a lot of things, but she would wear this heart rate monitor for field hockey and have to go sit down. And she was just very determined to do everything. So I wasn't worried in that way. I was more just sort of frustrated because I was just watching her shrink, and she's 5'11". She's not a small girl. So I was like, what? Somebody needs to fix this. She's quite athletic and she couldn't do the things that she loved. So yeah, it was hard, but it was more just sort of bizarre, to watch. It was just bizarre. I can't explain to you. And then I started thinking, maybe the thyroid is my problem. Maybe everybody should check their thyroid.
Oh my gosh. I'm like, I have had my thyroid tested so many times that my husband makes a joke of it.
But yeah, that all of us have something like that going on.
Wow.
My internet's wobbly. Sorry.
Yeah, a little bit. Yeah.
Yeah.
It goes to your point of the betrayal of the body and how it's all out of our control. I mean, right. Not only do we become nursing moms and have all this stuff happen, but then, even on a good day, is anything really consistent, and what can we do? What can we do with that? So you have so many things in the book. You have moms who live across the street from each other and have pursued very different paths in life, which is another one of these relationships. I mean, all of these different threads. It's almost like a grid. I want to draw the connections of all the different really important relationships in the book. But those two who live across the street and raise their kids together, but have very different outlooks on life. Professionalism versus stay at home, their own sort of tense relationship and how that evolves over time. Tell me about May and what's the other name? Oh my God.
We have Diana, we have Mary, we have
Mary and Diana. Okay.
Yeah.
Tell me about Mary and Diana and what you were trying to do with that juxtaposition.
So that sort of came out of the Madame Bovary thing. I was thinking of just sort of 3 different versions of women. And so Diana is sort of based on, my father's a classics professor, and he always was bringing home, academics when I was a kid. And I think, cocktail parties at the house with a bunch of classicists. So fun. But so that really Diana comes from me just sort of eavesdropping on those people, those experiences. And Mary is, well, my mother did say to me the other day, if there's a movie, I'd like to be played by Meryl Streep. I was like, Mom, you're not in the book. But my mother believes herself to be in the book because it is true that she would sit on the back porch and smoke cigarettes. That is her. But that's just another, just the sort of a woman who, due to, choices she made when she was very young, is living this life that, is abhorrent to her, really. And the sort of the sickness that kind of unhappiness can cause, I think. So, yeah, so they're just these different versions of women whose creative lives have been sort of curtailed in various ways, who feel like it's either this or that, which I don't personally feel, though I can understand it for sure. I was not writing anything when my children were small. It's very hard, and I don't know how people do that, but yeah, so I can understand absolutely how they feel.
And then talk a little more about Gus and what happens to a group of 3 and how all of that can, talk more about that.
It's making me go back to the other question about how did I pull these all together. I'm like, there's a lot of 3s.
Yeah, there are a lot. There are a lot of threads. But they're great. They're so vivid and yeah.
Yeah. So that to me was sort of thinking about the way that your relationships change as you grow older, partly the way that it's really hard to maintain friendships with people who knew you as a child. I have one very dear friend who I'm so excited will be in Philadelphia at my event. Aww. That I've known since I was born, but people sort of slough away, right? And just thinking about how you can think the reason for that, but you might not. And you can think everything about the house you grew up in, but you might not. But mainly it was about, like I said before, the idea of the importance of really listening, not just bumbling along and thinking that you know something, but really listening. Gus is so sad. Gus doesn't want to tell his story, and Leo doesn't want to betray him. And it's an awful story that he has. And there's, he's a hard person, but there's like a nobility to him that I appreciate. And I think it's part of that story of sort of refiguring your relationships with people as you grow older, if those relationships are valuable to you.
So what do you want readers to take away once they put down the undercurrent?
I want them to think and pay better attention to the people in their lives. That's sort of a high calling for the book, but I think that would be the best thing. And I also think just to consider for mothers how truly transformative that experience is. I think it's such a common experience and an ordinary experience, in that so many people do it, that I think we don't necessarily register how much change it really requires in a person. My mother always says, beware of life events that require parties.
Oh,
Right?
that's so
It's
funny.
like, if you need a party thrown by women, you're in trouble. Right? But it's a little bit true. It is hard. And I can't think of anything that I've done that has been harder. And it certainly was in the easiest possible circumstances with lots of people who love me and nobody's hungry and all that. So I think that is important just to register. And I think if you were a mother reading the story, to feel that you don't maybe have to ascribe to the maybe obsessive positive talk about motherhood. It's like, it's okay to be bad at it or not love every minute, and I think that's better for your kids if you're not trying to be perfect or superhuman or something, as the cultural narrative would have it. But yeah, that's what I would say.
So in a way, is the disappearance of the girl actually you?
I think it's any girl, right? I think the other thing I didn't say at the beginning when you were asking about the inspirations for the book is that my husband and I watched so much television during COVID. One thing we watched so much of was British detective shows. And every time there's a girl disappearing, there's a fascination with that. And I think the fascination is because it's has metaphorical possibility, right? The girl in you does disappear, and like, how do you her there? I loved being 8, right? I loved being strong and feeling like I could do anything, and I try to keep that with me. I try to keep that kind of, I don't know, confidence before you feel the buffets of the world, But yeah, I think, yeah, absolutely, for sure.
Well, launching a book is one of those life events that has a party. So
Yeah, but not just thrown by women.
not just thrown by women. Okay, all right. So that's the caveat, I guess. When you think about like the people you're going to meet and getting this book out into the world and what some of the goals are, like what are your grand visions? What would you like to have happen from this point forward?
Well, I don't know. My friend Deborah Immergut, who is great, once had like an event at her house, and for female artists in the valley where I live, and she talked at that event about equanimity because I think that's really my goal is just to sort of enjoy, and I don't have any expectations for how it will go, just because I have learned in the course of this process that, you could write world's best novel and nobody might like it or right, or buy it or whatever, and those are industry issues, right, or something. And it's a bit mysterious, all of that. So I don't have any expectations for how it will go. I am really glad and grateful that people who read it seem to like it. My colleague who was reading it last week, he kept coming every day. He's like, I've got it. It's Leo. Like every day he would come with like a new theory, he was the very best kind of reader, so engaged. He was quoting sentences to me, and it was so to me, that's amazing. And I didn't write it thinking that anybody would ever read it. I just wrote it to write it. So I think my expectations are to enjoy myself and meet people and see what this is all about.
Amazing. If you could go back and do the writing of this book over again, would you have changed anything? Would you have started it years ago? Would you have just knowing where you've ended up today?
I think maybe because I teach writing, I don't really think that there's a perfect final version of anything. It just sort of is finished when the forces around you say it's finished. I think if it weren't to be published, I would still be finished tinkering with it just because I think that, at some certain point, the story is behind you, right? And you're not in it anymore. I think I would have maybe, and just in terms of the way I wrote it, the actual nitty gritty of the pieces, there were so many charts and color coding and all kinds of things. And if one character is wearing a sweater on page 2 and you change that, then you got to find all the sweaters and change it. It's like really, so I think I maybe would try to be more methodical in my construction, but I think that might just be how I am. I don't know.
And how much has what you're reading with your students or just for fun, how much does that inspire? I know with Madame Bovary, you said obviously it did and there was a direct connection, but talk about sort of the influences of some of the books in your life, and especially the ones you delve deep into.
So I really love simplicity in prose, and I love prose that is not afraid to try to be both simple and kind of luminous. I think that is really hard to do. And so that's kind of what I try to do and what I really love when I see it. I've read Gilead and all those books, and I think those are just perfect in terms of their construction, or a ton of French I love they're a different flavor of book, but for a similar reason. I think they're very precise and simple and clear and very complex at the same time, which I really appreciate. I like novels that think about time. I think maybe that's obvious, but I really love Emma Cline, and I think her two, The Girls and then The Guest, treat time so differently, and I was sort of amazed by that, and I love those. So yeah, I'm always just I'm a pretty avid reader, and so I'm always just kind of looking for things that I like, and then thinking about, because I have very kind of strong gut reactions to things, and then trying to consider why I like them. And usually the answer is that kind of combination of simplicity and beauty or complexity, if that answers your question.
That answers my question. And do you have advice to aspiring authors?
Oh, I don't know. I think for me, the hardest thing is just sitting, right? So if that is your particular problem, I have advice, which is just to the Pomodoro situation. I set timers. I'm like, I'm only sitting for an hour. It is okay. Even right now I'm standing, I really have trouble. I have trouble sitting, which makes it hard to type. But I think the best advice I've received that I would pass on is just to know that the writing is the fun part, right? So that sort of playing in the sandbox and focusing and thinking deeply about something is really fun, and trying to get to some form of expression that is pleasing to you is really fun. So my advice would just be why not? I wouldn't have any expectations about how it's going to go, because I think those things are really complex and out of most people's control, right? But I think just to kind of sit and try is great. I'm organizing my launch party with our dining services, and as it turns out, 2 of them are writing novels. One's like a murder mystery about the dining services, and I had a dream, and I'm like, that's amazing. Yes, go do that thing, because that's the fun part. Is she's like, I look forward to it when I get home from work. I sit down and I write. She's like, it's so silly. I'm like, no, it's not. It's what anybody does, right? Who's doing that. And some people are fortunate to do it, for their life, and that's amazing. But I think most people are not, right? So most people need to kind of wedge it in where they can, because it brings them joy. Yeah, that's what I would say.
Is there a character in here you miss the most now that the book is done?
Oh, I think I like the most the one that probably nobody should like, who's Diana. I really love Diana. She's so, I don't know. I just really enjoyed writing those parts. And she's kind of mean. She's a little ruthless. She just is, I don't know. I just enjoyed her. And I liked those art toys so much. And I was so happy to sort of stumble across them. So yeah, I would say she's the one. where
Amazing.
my secret bias lies.
Well, Sarah, congratulations. We're so honored to be publishing your book. It's so good, and everybody must read it. It is just amazing. You're so talented.
Thank you so much.
Really
Yeah,
talented. It's so exciting. So thank you so much for trusting us, and very excited to be along for the ride of this one.
We'll see how it goes, right?
It's already going great. All right. Well, best of luck, and watch out for all those parties by women.
All right. Thank you.
Okay. Bye.
Bye.
Bye. Thanks for listening to Moms Don't Have Time to Read Books. If you love it, please leave a review and follow us on social at Zibby Owens and at Zibby Readers.